Hi, and thank you for joining us today. I hope our discussion. Hi, thank you for joining us on this webinar on innovation, where we'll be discussing how 3D printing enhances project-based learning. I'm your host, Francis Vigent, CEO and founder of KnowAtom, based here in chilly Salem, Massachusetts. In a few minutes, we'll speak with Jason Yoakum, co-founder and CEO of Stacks 3D, a leader in 3D printing technology for the K-12 classroom. Stacks is based out of the Greater Phoenix area, Chandler. And to kind of kick things off here, I'd like to talk a little bit about what problem-based learning is before we jump into our session with Jason. So here at KnowAtom, we're really focused on higher order thinking, helping classrooms to have the tools necessary in order to place students in the role of scientist and engineer on an everyday basis. And that takes the form of problem-based learning, and many people talk about PBL, but what are the essential elements of problem-based learning? So I'd like to just quickly go over those just so that we are all on the same page. So first and foremost, problem-based learning is a pedagogical teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to complex questions, problems in a challenging and authentic environment. So if you look at what the key elements of problem-based learning are, there are what's on the slide before you. There is specific knowledge, understanding, and skills that are required. And those come from standards and content that's defined by next generation science standards, Common Core state standards, and it's really focused on critical thinking and problem solving. Collaboration, self-management, those 4 C's or 21st century skills that we often think about. The next piece is that it centers on a challenging problem or question, and very kind of to the root of the spirit of this is that it's framed by a meaningful problem where students have to solve that problem or answer a question. And this is again where it ties in with next generation science standards and the idea of science and engineering. The third piece is sustained inquiry, that students are engaged in a rigorous and extended process of asking questions or identifying problems, and then in sort of the context of engineering design process or the scientific process, which we might think of as scientific method, that students unpack those questions and problems towards a solution. And I want to just point out that rigor in this context is really not doing something over and over and over again, but in fact rigor is where challenge exceeds skill. So this is a challenging environment that requires extended time, and so you may think of multiple class periods as extended time. Okay, doesn't mean it's a 3-month thing. Authenticity is the fourth tenet. Authenticity means that students have an opportunity to develop a new interest in something that's real world, something that is a task or tool that has an impact, and it relates to the quality of the standard itself. Okay. Fifth is student voice and choice. Problem-based learning involves student decision-making around how they solve a problem or answer a question. So that includes how the students work. They're making choices and expressing their voice around that. Essentially, how are we going to organize ourselves in this small team? And also what they create. Okay, problem-based learning is authentic not only because it's an opportunity to develop an interest and it's connected to a student's world, but it's also because it's an opportunity to create something that is personal, that's a reflection of the student's own thinking. Okay. As part of that diversity of thought in a class, the next tenet has to do with reflection. So it involves students and teachers reflecting on learning as that sort of starts with the identification of a problem or question and how it flows through to the results of how student teams chose independently to solve problems or answer questions. So you may think of that as Socratic dialogue and sort of a debrief session even. Depends again on the context. And finally, problem-based learning always involves critique and revision. So again, this idea that students are engaged in a process that is centered on their thoughts, on their sort of involvement in organizing in these groups around a problem or question, but teachers are skillfully managing this environment to facilitate students giving feedback and also the teacher giving feedback, and how that plays out in the revision process so that students can use the feedback to improve but also learn from the process of actually trying to engage a problem or a question. So, you know, problem-based learning is something that we could spend an entire hour speaking about, but the reason that I want to set it out before you now is so that as we think about the context of 3D printing, that you understand, you know, what problem-based learning is when we talk about it, and why KnowAtom is interested in 3D printing, and why we're even discussing it here as it relates to innovation, has to do with why KnowAtom exists. You see, we're a company made of public educators who believe higher order thinking really matters, that it's the key to every child's future in any discipline or career they choose, and this is true K through 12. So our sole focus here at KnowAtom is to challenge students to be scientists and engineers on an everyday basis, and we accomplish this by supporting educators, whether public, private, district, charter, and so on, with the tools, training, and hands-on resources to create a classroom where hands-on problem-based learning happens every day. So the reason we're talking about 3D printing specifically is that it has a role in this problem-based learning environment, what we just sort of went through, those different tenets, in helping to develop these higher order thinking skills. And what I've shown you here on the screen is Bloom's taxonomy rearranged, because under these new standards, we have an opportunity right from the standards to create, evaluate, and analyze in our classrooms simultaneously to really create that environment that challenges students. And so KnowAtom developed the first complete problem-based learning curriculum for K-8 aligned to the new science standards. It's something that we've worked on over 10 years and helped sort of develop in the process of all of the NGSS releases. And today this curriculum is used all over the US and even internationally, and with thousands and thousands of students. But along the way, we find people who have bought or are contemplating 3D print technology in the classroom, whether it's for a specific classroom or a sort of a tech center or 3D printing center. And some don't know what to do with the 3D printers that they've bought. Others ignore the concept of a 3D printer altogether. And yet there's others who think very critically about how such a technology fits into the broader fabric of how a child's problem-based learning experience really comes together. And so with that said, today I hope our discussion with Jason will help support you wherever you're at on the spectrum, and to help better understand and make the most of problem-based learning with 3D printers. If you're on the live session, I'd let you know that there's a panel on your screen where you can ask questions, and we would invite you to ask those questions. We hope to save at least 10-15 minutes towards the end of this webinar so that we can answer those questions. There is also a team member from KnowAtom who will help answer any questions you have related to KnowAtom, and also forward those questions related to Stacks 3D, 3D printing technology, and so on over to Jason and myself. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Jason Yoakum, CEO and co-founder of Stacks 3D. Jason has over 20 years of technical leadership experience in the field of aerospace engineering. He was considered a super user for AutoCAD, which many of you may be familiar with, and helped to develop and refine the software to the highest standards it's known for today. Though he worked through the work he does in the community, he hopes to bring engineering to K-12, and his background includes steering major commercial and government satellite missions. He enjoys helping students of all ages consider STEM subjects as a profession, and I'm really glad to have Jason joining us here today. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
that. Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that warm welcome. And we are certainly honored and privileged to partner with KnowAtom in this webinar, and hopefully our goal today is really to talk about bringing technology into the classroom with the background that that Francis just laid out. That was a great background of what we believe bringing this technology into the classroom to ultimately give the incredible teachers and our children additional tools to help keep them engaged while educating and empowering them. We find it essential to augment curricula with all these technical tools like 3D printing to keep the students engaged. And as you know, studies have shown significantly greater retention rates through project-based learning. And as you mentioned earlier, and adding technology into the mix also provides career readiness for our quickly evolving technological world that we're embarking in. So if you want to go on to the next slide there, Francis.
Absolutely.
We are talking about today, we'll go through this brief agenda, and I'll go through a little bit of the history, what the background is, the basics of 3D printing for those of you that may not have seen it before. Go through some of the different types of printers, the purposes, how the current uses that we see them in the K-12 classroom and that we're currently working with some local school districts on. Talk a little bit about scanning, which is the next element of 3D technology that helps augment, again, the actual technology itself. And then we'll finish up and hopefully have some time for questions.
Wonderful.
Great. So on the next slide, really what I wanted to just talk about here a little bit is, while this technology may really feel brand new to most people, it's actually been around since the late 80s. There's a gentleman by the name of Chuck Hull, working as a material science engineer for a major company back in the early 80s. He was experimenting with curing resins for tabletop coatings, and he recognized that UV light actually had the ability to accurately cure this resin in a known and predictable timeline. He translated this into a machine capable of using a laser to cure the resin in a specific pattern. The 3D printer was born at that point. So when you look at this timeline, that's really the 6 years later stereolithography apparatus. During that 80 to 86 period, he was developing this process. From there, additional types of 3D printers came to the market. And once all the patents were released back in the 2005 timeframe, we now find ourselves with over 500 print manufacturers vying for a seat at the table as a major player in what is being called the fourth industrial revolution. By the way, the first item that Chuck created, that little cup that I talked about, it's set to go as a permanent exhibit in the Smithsonian.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So for me, yeah, that kind of it highlights the value of what it has to society. So you can move on there.
Sure. So
Go ahead.
Just to sort of pull it together, though, in terms of the stereolithography, so I think most people are probably familiar with getting either a sealant on their teeth or their children's teeth, and I just wanted to sort of ask the question. So what you were describing in terms of curing resins with ultraviolet light, for instance, and what was sort of early 3D printing concept, is essentially the same process, correct? To kind of break it down into general terms, you've got the resin that goes on your teeth, and then the doctor takes a light and shines it on there, and sort of magically it goes from being this liquid or gel into something that's a solid piece.
Exactly, and to put that in context, the way all of the patents have evolved, there have been multiple industries that have been created just by that first initial contact of being able to cure a resin with UV light. So to your point, in the dental industry, medical has been a large impact, but then you've also had it in other industries as well, where they're using the same types of processes to do heat-sensitive materials, for example.
Wonderful. So how it works is basically, so then the 3D printing concept being, if you can move the light in very precise ways, you can cure just where that light is going, and that is sort of the 3D printing concept of,
It is, as well as that's evolved into some of the other technologies, which I think I have a slide later on where I'll talk a little bit about the different types of printers, but the basics of what you just described is exactly how that works. And quite often we'll find that the initial part of that, like the software, what does it mean to produce a model and turn that into something that I could actually print? Well, there's a process involved that's been very, very streamlined over the past 25 years. And it's now to the point where it's really literally plug and play. You can either produce a model, and if you've got 3D knowledge where you can design in 3D, that's great. If not, you could download files and simply bring those files into a software where it's sliced. Each layer is turned into a G code, and then that's translated into the hardware, and the hardware actually just starts printing it down. And all of that is a background process. In fact, in your packages at the end, there'll be a nice video that you can look through that kind of describes that process a little bit easier to follow. But as you described it, we think of it as a very smart glue gun at the end of the day. You're laying, the filament's heating up, it's pushing out one end of the filament out of a hot end, or in the case of the resin, the laser is actually heating and cooling the material to the point where it hardens, and that's what each layer is printing until your product is either pulled out of the liquid resin bed or printed down like a smart glue gun would print layers of material down.
That's great. So just kind of bringing this back to the context of problem-based learning. So really 3D print technology is something that has emerged out of sort of one person's experimentation trying to solve a problem, curing resins with ultraviolet light, and sort of the realization that perhaps if we had more focused light and we move it in specific ways, that we could actually form entire uniquely shaped objects.
Yeah.
And then how it works is what you just described, bringing together some software that can, take a scan or take, some 3D rendering that is digital, send that over to a hardware printer, just the way that we might create a digital Word document in our computer, send that over to a printing machine around the corner, and actually get some physical representation of what was digital.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's very well described. One of the things we often talk about too, another fun way to describe it, you could almost think of it as making lasagna or phyllo dough. You're basically taking thin layers of a product and you're laying it down layer by layer until the final product is completed. So in lasagna's case, you've got maybe 8 layers of noodles with a bunch of stuff in the middle of it. Well, that's really similar to what's going on with a 3D printer.
Gotcha. So in essence, it's kind of like a color Xerox machine these days, because most people may or may not know this, but in a black and white, you just lay down black ink. And in a color printer, you're putting black ink, but you're also overlaying red, yellow, and blue to get any.
Yeah.
So in this case, though, with 3D printing, it has mass, so that's where you get your 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions, correct?
Exactly. It's actually, you can think of it as just laying paper on top of one another, or laying plastic on top of one another, or laying this different types of material, gluing them together until you get your 3D object built.
So the connection now to problem-based learning, how is this driving a digital industrial revolution? Because I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is considered the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, and it was all centered around textiles. There were mills, and people took cotton and made thread, and the thread became cloth, and the cloth became something else, and that was kind of the American Industrial Revolution getting going. But that's very different than what you've just described in terms of 3D printing technology. So what is the digital industrial revolution?
Okay, so if you want to go to the next slide, I think it's slide 6, where it's knowing the basic, imagine the possibilities.
Yep, we're there.
It's pretty profound, really, about knowing the basics. So basically, we kind of talked about 2 different types of 3D printers and how they work. And if you could think about that, imagine what that means for the future. Really, this photo illustrates the breadth of impacting to prototyping, manufacturing, education, they're just the beginning. They're just really beginning to be conceived in industries, even though they have been developed in specific industries, medical, aerospace, and that for years. Really, it's opened up this huge space of growth. So in the next few slides, I'll touch a little bit on some current uses in the industry, but just picking a picture a few years from now where you won't have to run to the store to get the piece you need to repair your dishwasher, for example. You'll just print it. When you're searching for that perfect gift, you'll just print it. When you have the idea that it's going to make you millions, you won't have to send it off internationally and spend thousands of dollars on prototyping. You'll just print it. That is in your daily life. Now imagine, what the impact of the industry is. There was a great article from Rick Smith in Forbes where this is from June of last year, he said, quote, "I believe, along with a growing number of leaders around the world, that 3D printing will change the way things are produced more in this century than the Industrial Revolution did over the last 300 years. Mm-hmm. So the article really goes on and states a few use cases. One of them that was profound to me, where there was an open design competition, was being held by General Electric. The goal was to redesign a bracket that attaches a jet engine to an airplane wing. There was this young Indonesian man. His design beat over 1,000 other submissions. Mm-hmm. What really made this surprising was that almost everyone out of everyone, really, the young man had absolutely no experience whatsoever with industrial manufacturing. In fact, none. Secondly, he had used a completely new design technique enabled by industrial 3D printing technologies. His bracket worked perfectly. It passed every one of the rigorous end-use industrial tests for durability, stress, reliability. GE put it through, and it weighed 83% less than the part it replaced. So what Smith really went on to say, he said, at about the same time, halfway around the world, GE's radical new fuel injection system for a jet engine first emerged from an industrial 3D metal printer. That previous system had 21 separate parts, never needed to be produced, shipped to the same location, and then assembled. The new 3D printed system had only one. It was 5 times stronger and contributed to an increase in fuel efficiency of an astonishing 15%. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that, that saved over $1 million per year on fuel on every single airplane that used the new system.
Wow.
So as we walk through these, I've got a few slides here. The architectural utilization on the next slide. Mm-hmm. If you think about that, if you've ever done any house hunting online lately, you've probably seen 3D walkthroughs of model homes. Mm-hmm. Some are done with virtual reality, and some are done with complete interactive tools. What we've noticed is, and we're partnering with 2 major nationwide home builders, where and some private architectural firms, where they create prints of their models for homes and buildings. What this does, it could be done in record time at a fraction of the cost over previous methods that they use. In fact, we had a client that called us on a Tuesday. They had a city council deadline on a Thursday. They needed their idea turned from the screen to an actual full printed, something that somebody could touch and feel. So in just days, they won a major government contract out of that. Hmm. So that's just another architectural example. Hmm. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Well, it's interesting that, in essence, a 3D printer is, in a lot of ways, no different than a paper printer that we might have in our classroom, whether it's, a laser printer or an inkjet, right, or something like that. It's a kind of revolutionary technology because of how it's going to change, or has changed. Really, it's not futuristic, it's present tense, how it mm-hmm. is changing the nature of how an idea, which is non-physical, becomes a physical reality. And so, mm-hmm. Perhaps the future may be, as you're describing, people envisioning a particular kind of doorknob, and maybe they print it for themselves right in their own right. house. Right. in one scenario, and then in another scenario, perhaps entire, I think about this Industrial Revolution concept, where as a child I would go in and visit these mills and the birthplace of the American Revolution and be like, wow, look at all these noisy machines and what they do. The future of that may be, 3D printers that are literally printing out things that Amazon delivers instead of it, coming from China in a complex logistics process that takes a lot of time and energy, and I think also creates a lot of waste, if I'm wrong, along the lines of what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I mean, you go from a significant amount of waste to zero waste, and that's one of the most profound changes, not just financially, but also if you think about the environment, you think about the lasting impacts throughout our culture. It really does have a profound effect. Even as you go into the space idea, as I was, there's a chart on here on aerospace utilizations. I mean, as the saying goes, if you can make it here, you'll make it anywhere. Well, in the 3D printing world, it doesn't get much trickier than zero gravity. Well, they've already printed in space. And the idea actually is to print all the items necessary on the next Mars mission. So there's actually a government grant and research being done of what they can do on another planet. And so the ability to not have to carry heavy payloads up into space, only and just really print the tools you need. They printed a ratchet is one of the items that they made in space the first time. So it's one of those things where you get into a situation that you didn't think about on the ground. You can actually go and change something. So really the idea is now you can shoot for the stars, and I had to use a space pun for that, sorry.
Sure, no pun intended, right? Well, and it's interesting that, when you think about space as an environment for 3D printing, I had never thought about the weightlessness nature of things, but the idea too that if you have to carry a payload and it's incredibly expensive and difficult to get the payload, whether it's to Mars or just to a space station, if you can bring that mass in an undefined form and use it sort of perfectly for your exact application, then it's sort of the perfect solution. Because like you said, if you need a ratchet, you get a ratchet. Maybe you didn't know you needed that ratchet when the rocket took off from Earth with the material to make the ratchet. You made that decision.
I love your point, Francis. Maybe you did know, and you planned it that way. So you just brought the material up, and it's a lower, smaller payload volume. So when you're launching on these rockets that are very, very expensive, you're really only going up there to what you need, and then you just print out the larger items that you need, solar array panels or things like that may take up more room in the payload before launch, or maybe you can't even survive launch because it's such a rugged environment when you're launching off the ground.
And you have also mentioned about medical utilization, and I know there's a gentleman here whose face was disfigured and was aided by some medical utilization. If you could talk a bit about how 3D printing is taking a more organic form.
Yeah, this is probably the furthest in terms of research and development and actually implementation. It's really and truly life-changing, as you can see the medical uses here. But we all find the medical applications of 3D printing to be the most exciting. They're the most impactful on our generation and even the generation beyond. But the simple things like printing a cast that is a perfect match for your arm or leg and allows you to swim or shower. I remember the first time I broke my wrist and it was just awful. I couldn't do anything with it. Well, now you can print a plastic cast that's a little bit more form-fitting and actually allow some air movement and freedom. That's an improvement. Now just translate that into making custom prosthetics, for example, that look and through sensor technologies actually feel more realistic than ever before. Just imagine the ability to reduce rejection rates of implanted organs, replacement structures, etc., all because they were made specifically for you, utilizing your DNA and your physical structure. Via scanning and 3D printing, what that means is a reduction in mortality rates. They're actually doing studies on that. The medical applications are beyond impressive, and we could take, like you said earlier, we could take easily an entire hour just covering the current uses and impacts where we actually see them. Just to kind of throw one out there, the first 3D printed kidney has been printed.
Wow.
And then used. They're printing skin cells as we speak. So it's a really amazing transformation and growth in that specific industry.
Wow. So just out of curiosity, I know we can't don't have time to go into all the details, but in terms of how you actually 3D print organic matter versus something, metal and plastic and these different polymers, I can understand that. It makes sense. You use a light, it causes a chemical reaction and changes, state or phase. But when it comes to something that's sort of a living, breathing tissue, are you basically starting with some seed cells and then you basically spray nutrients and kind of get them to grow in a specific direction? How does that work?
Right. Well, what we always say, and I'm not a doctor, I won't claim to be, but what we always try to draw a corollary to is when you're just using plastic, it's a material science issue. You've got a set of criteria. You need temperature, you need speed, you need the XYZ coordinates, and that's basically all you need to create an algorithm that you could print with. In the medical world, it's not much different. I mean, really, you've got a set of criteria. You need, like you mentioned, you need some of the seed or the structure. You need the DNA. You need an environment that you can allow that to grow in. And so there are bioplotters out there that either are heated or cooled in closed volumes that just take the structure and create a structure for things to grow on. And that's so you could predefine what that structure looks like by 3D printing it, and then the cells and whatnot grow from there. So as long as they've got their speed, their temperature, their volume, the location, the pretty basic criteria, you can print anything.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's interesting, some of the work I've been doing recently, nonprofit-related volunteer work in Africa, one of the interesting things that I've, I think links a bit, well, to your next slide, but even in some of your earlier slides on aerospace and architectural in relation to this medical application, is the idea of e-health or e-medicine. And when you start to think about remote locations, or simply if you look at the United States, there was a joint project dealing with remote medicine between NASA and folks who are just an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours from medical facilities. And sometimes just if you're on an Indian reservation, for instance, here in the US, you may be very, very distant from the base of specialists that are available in New York City or Boston or San Francisco or elsewhere. And the reason I mention this is that the idea that you could have a 3D printer in a community, and as issues come up, you could actually be 3D printing medical devices to be able to solve issues for that remote community, and sort of use that as sort of, you can think of it like the paper printer. I mean, imagine if somebody needed a book for their library and you can just push print from far away and you can print out, the Grapes of Wrath. And I don't know why I picked that one, but we'll just pick that one. No offense to anybody who doesn't like the Grapes of Wrath. But, you can print that to that printer that's in that community, and suddenly now that book becomes part of their library. I picture e-health and e-medicine as being something similar, where if you have an internet connection, you now have cameras and video screens in a community where that remote sort of health clinic with somebody with very basic first aid training or with no training at all can go to this video screen, present the problem to a specialist thousands of miles away who can diagnose and then prescribe something, and then the 3D printer can become a delivery tool. And I'm sure, I don't know how far we are away from printing actual drugs, but I would imagine that that's at some point in the future, if you have the various elements necessary. I mean, has there been any thought about that?
Oh, sure. I mean, you're all over it for certain. There are the major drug manufacturers are already doing research and development, getting FDA approval on the processes, the new processes that they're going through, because they've seen the financial challenges that they've been working through. So they've been able to come up with these new processes using 3D printing technologies to drive their overall production costs down, and that's already happening. But I love the philanthropic need and the idea of getting it to the consumer or the person that is in need somewhere that can have an additional tool to really help support their communities, or the situation that they're in to really produce something valued for their communities all around the globe. And that's something that we're extremely excited about engaging in more at Saks 3D. As we support the large companies in their endeavors, but they're far along in the development. What's missing is the gap between the big business to the medium businesses all the way down to the consumer, and that's what we want to focus on, and the philanthropic sides are huge. Yeah.
Well, and I like too that it helps in certain cases, depending on what context we're talking about, it also helps to eliminate some conflict, because oftentimes as these scarce resources are crossing borders or making their way from city centers to remote locations like medicine, various technologies, they're so scarce, they're highly valuable, and so suddenly it becomes something which unfortunately creates conflict between those who would profit from preventing its passage to those who are trying to do anything to get it to, make motion and so on. And so, the last thing I'll say around this too, that I was very impressed with in the medical sphere was there's some organization whose name escapes me, who started cataloging, you mentioned prosthesis, and I never really appreciated, not needing a physical prosthesis myself, the cost of a medical prosthesis like a hand, a leg, a foot. And when you think about children in particular, in their growth and development, how often that prosthesis needs to change in the course of, 3 months, 6 months, a year.
I think you're talking about the Enable project, and that's something that we've actually produced about 35 Enable prosthetics for children, and it's a beautiful organization. But if you exactly what you're thinking about, for they have these pre-designed mechanical hands. First of all, who doesn't want a mechanical hand? But but for the kids, that have had suffered some kind of sort of deformity or loss of limb in some cases, if they could still have a little bit of movement in either their wrist or their elbow, we're able to 3D print these custom-made prosthetics that they can now ride bikes with or pick cups up with, and you're talking less than $50 in material. It's free from us because it's a philanthropic thing, but if they have their printer, it's less than $50 in material, and in the past, they grow an inch in a 4-month period. They got to go buy a new arm or a new prosthetic, and those are thousands of dollars to these families. So it's a significant, it's a great program. So that's the Enable project. If you ever want to look that up online,
I'll have to look more into that. So with that said, I guess what we're talking about here is the connection to problem-based learning is really more or less that a 3D printer is an opportunity to take an idea which we could build with sticks and wheels and so on and so forth, and if we envision a different kind of wheel and we can digitize that, then we can print it out and make it physical. And so it's sort of an extension or a new way to express through a new type of hardware how that solution is manifest. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate, and really what this slide, I just wanted to depict the different types of technologies that are common on the market. Really the only one that's missing here is the full metal printers that are out there now. But this kind of gives you a brief description of the 3 different pieces of hardware. We talked about SLA. FDM is the plastic-based printers, and then the SLS is selective laser sintering, where they use a powder of the root material and they use a laser to harden it. But the process of slicing it and hardening, either heating and cooling and hardening a layer and then printing the next layer on top, is identical between all 3, because that's the fundamentals of it. If you go to the next slide, I could talk a little bit about the FDM printer, because that's one I think that is more relevant to the classroom. And that's what we're seeing in most of the schools, at least K through 8. Some of the high schools are getting into some of the higher level printers that may be the SLA printers or the SLS printers, but for the most part, the FDM is what that is. And just as we discussed earlier, just to give you kind of a picture of how it works, you've got a build platform, you have a model that's being printed, you have a heated nozzle and a filament driver, and then the filament that sits on a spool that's really thin. It almost looks like a thin wire, but it's plastic, and it goes through the filament driver extruder head. The nozzle heats it up, It goes back and forth across the build platform, and the build platform either raises or lowers. And as it's lowering and the printhead or the nozzle is going back and forth, it's printing, each of the items, and each of the layers. And what we think about with this in terms of the classroom, the filament can be printed in many different colors. It can contain metal particles, so you can finish it right. You can patina it. You can paint it. It takes welded acrylic paints. So that final outcome, or whatever you're trying to produce in the classroom, the kids can make it their own. They can paint it. They can make stories about it. Create. So in the classroom, this means basically you could print out an animal or a plant cell and have the students paint it and label it or whatever you want to do. They can also decorate them, customize them. Here's another thing. If you have a printer in your school, how about printing out your school logo and selling them as a fundraiser? They don't have to be just one color. Kids can use their imagination with it. So they design these things. We've actually had multiple districts in our location, in our local community here, where they purchased printers through sometimes their grants, or sometimes their principal will get one, or sometimes their parent-teacher organizations will buy one for them. But once they get in the classroom, they'll put a fundraiser together and they pay that printer off within the first year. Parents are willing to pay for the logos, and they'll just do fundraisers throughout the year. So it's a great way to think about that. And then getting into the classroom. Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing. I think you've described some uses of a 3D printer in K-12. I guess making the connection here to KnowAtom's interest in 3D printers and how that connects with what we're doing. I think so. To kind of give you the framework, it's that students are going through grade level specific curriculum. They're starting in September and they are going all the way through June or August or whatever, and there's specific scope and sequence of content that's integrated, that's sort of developing scaffolding, we would say, in education from one lesson to the next. But as coming back to that problem-based learning framework, students are being challenged on an everyday basis to engage real problems and real questions. And so as they do that in their teams, they have to decide, what's my approach to this problem? Or what's my approach to this question? And so what we do is we have the actual, for lack of a better term, kits of materials that go with all of these lessons and units, so that the classroom has everything they need. But by virtue, it's the same problem that you have on the space station. What you put in a kit is limited. It's not. It's finite, and that is a function of reality, right? Nobody has unlimited. However, what I really like about FDM printers or any other kind of 3D printer is that a student in one team who's solving a problem, who has that same set of components, can actually extend their resource base if they have access to printer time and filament, so that they could actually, instead of printing out an elephant or a school logo, they're actually looking at this problem and saying, if we actually had the same wheel, but if we could put lines across it perpendicular to its direction of motion, we could get more traction, and we might be able to convert more energy, and that would actually get us a further distance to be able to solve this problem, carrying a greater load, because that's really what's at the root of this problem. So kind of back to that fundamental purpose of the technology itself, and extending children's creativity to beyond an existing resource space to something that's much more fluid. I mean, that's what I get really excited about. And I think about, for those who are on the live session, I guess they're getting a little bit of a tip-off here, but, KnowAtom's been working on a new interactive platform for all of our users, which kind of takes what we currently have up, brings it to the next level. And, along with the curriculum in the professional development resources and everything that kind of fits hand in glove, we've been thinking more and more about whether we should have seed files or different specs which could be downloadable into 3D printing software platform, so that children can modify and recreate or fully create something that can extend what they're already doing, in the context of, Unit 1, Lesson 1 in September or so on. So, I mean, how many folks do you see taking 3D printer technology to that level? Because I feel like it's sort of, there's kind of that level of being familiar, like we would be familiar with the Xerox printer, and, we could print off anything. But then there's sort of this other level. Where do you see classrooms at in different places?
Well, I see it in kind of two directions. So I see everyone that we've interacted with that actually is using 3D printers in school is doing exactly what you said. All of them.
And sorry, exactly what I said by which, I guess I said too much.
Yeah, no, that's okay. In terms of developing, so you have a curriculum, you have a purpose of what lesson you're going to create, and outside of that lesson, utilizing the 3D printer as a tool, there are already existing resources available that just augment exactly what they're teaching in the classroom. So, for example, if you're doing a project, a math project, and you are needing to do that with a bridge, for example. You're trying to teach the way you would, the structural integrity of a bridge, and you're teaching that lesson. There are examples and actually predefined help online where you can just download files that augment exactly what you're doing, what you're doing in the classroom. So it gives what we're noticing, I guess to kind of clarify what we're noticing, is we're noticing the teachers, when they have a tool like this, it gives them an alternative way to engage the kids. But then with the kids, we're noticing because of the project-based learning, they're actually utilizing this tool to create things that they may not have had the time to create in the classroom in a normal day or in a normal workflow. And so we're seeing that in those two ways. So one of the ideas in the classroom, some educational samples that I think we talk about on slide 13, and we could skip past slide 12 also if you'd like, Francis, because that's just more of a view of a printer that is very, very nice for K through 12 classrooms.
Right.
But on slide 13,
just out of curiosity, where can people find these 3D printers like you're showing here?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, so if you get on our website, stax3d.com, we have both this printer as well as a bundle that we've created, and thank you for that. We have as well as a bundle we created that helps the teacher or augments what they're currently doing in the classroom. It comes with 4 books. It comes with what we call inspiration cards that gives the teacher kind of a guideline to how to use the printer, how to maybe think about a lesson plan for a specific purpose, math, science, reading, storytelling, whatever you're doing in the classroom, we give them kind of a tool as part of that package. But you can get that on stax3d.com and check out. We've got that bundle package available there for your view.
Super.
Awesome. And then in terms of the inside the classroom and what we were talking about earlier, is there are so many sample projects of math. I'll give you a few of them. Math, scaling of objects. Physics, I was talking about the bridges with structural integrity. Biology, anatomy visualizations. Chemistry, being able to, chemistry compound models and material science. There are games that are already downloadable files on fraction games that help you really work through math and some of the struggles that you may have, learning math all the way through. So it's just what we see is it's a real augmentation of what you just spoke about, what KnowAtom is bringing and helping the classroom with. And so it's just a representation of that for that slide.
That's great. Well, it's kind of interesting because you use the word augmentation, which I would agree with. I believe that that's what most classrooms try to use 3D print technology for is an augmentation. When I think of augmentation, I think of something that's sort of added on, supplementary,
Yeah, it
and
enhances that
an enhancement. Yeah.
possibility, right? Yeah,
But
yeah,
I guess I also, in the case of KnowAtom, what I think of it as is as a tool for extension, and in a different way,
ooh,
almost like
like
being
that.
in the thread of
Yeah,
the learning. Because quite frankly, you know, in science or in any KnowAtom class, could we use a Xerox printer? Sure, we could, if it made
hmm,
sense to. And I think that's the same thing with 3D printing. It's
yeah,
like, if it makes sense to, this is a technology that we can use to solve a problem. Xerox
right.
is, well, I don't know how we would use that necessarily to solve a problem, but maybe we could. But 3D printing, to be able to create a 3D object, now that's pretty clever, and I could see solving a
Yeah,
lot of problems with that. And I like, too, as we were talking about scanning, so the
hmm,
previous example you were showing here, this is a handheld scanner to kind of go around an object, so I could picture a student
right.
creating something and saying, I want to scan this end of it so that whatever I create, that goes onto that matches exactly. How does this type of 3D scanner work?
Sure, yeah, very similarly, except for on this one, if you look behind, so this it sits on top of a rotating table, and then behind that it uses a flash of light, which is basically a camera, and a laser. So the laser identifies the surfaces, and the camera takes a picture of it, and it basically just stitches those images together as the item that's sitting on top of the turntable is rotating around. So you could put small objects on there, and it'll scan them. And really the purpose of kind of showcasing these things for the classroom is oftentimes you don't want a tool that's scary or a tool that's going to make more work for the already taxed teachers that are trying to get through the week. And so what we really look for is ways to make that job easier and utilize the technology to engage the students differently. And this is just a way to do that. I mean, you could either download files, you could scan existing objects, and you could talk about the process of that occurring, but then you could also incorporate lessons around all three that we believe is fulfilling and helpful to the classroom. But it's literally like I just spoke. It's taking a bunch of pictures as the thing is rotating around.
That's great. And then the software pieces them together and I suppose the more
Right.
sophisticated the software, the better sort of piecing together of the parts of the pictures.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. It's much more complex depending on what you're trying to produce. And so we really cater to education, and so we've got a variety of different scanners available that we can help the educational institutions with as well.
That's great. So I just want to look at the time real quick and let people know
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
we have a couple of questions keyed up. So maybe
Okay.
for those folks who are on the line who haven't had a chance to drop a question in, we're going to get to these questions in 1 second. But just to let you know, you may want to drop those in to your question panel, and we're gonna get to those literally in a minute or two. Jason, while those are coming in, would you mind to just kind of give us a little compare contrast in like 30 seconds of the software, and then maybe some community model sites as we kind of move into question and answer?
Absolutely, and I kind of queued that up a bit with the scanning part of things, trying to make it as easy and user-friendly as possible. The industry has gone that way. It's no longer that you have to have a PhD in 3D design work to be able to print in objects anymore. There's free software out there, as this chart is showing. You've got MakerBot software, there's Cura slicing software, Tinkercad, Autodesk, Blender, Inkscape. These are all free software programs. Like I mentioned before in my great bio that you put out, thank you for that, the AutoCAD super user. I use Tinkercad more than anything, and it's literally like what it sounds. If you remember Tinker Toys, it's Tinkercad, but a software version of that. So you can get on there, and it's common blocks and shapes, and you could just move and create 3D models on a free software program like that. But then there are some higher-end software packages that some of the high schools are getting into, like SolidWorks, like ZBrush, and like Simplified 3D. But those are packages that you have a little bit of training on. But again, becoming very, very user-friendly for the consumer as well. It just takes a little bit of training.
That's super. And how about those community sites where folks can
Yeah,
find
this
some.
is fantastic. This is the one that we always urge first-time users of 3D printers to start with. Thingiverse, it's a MakerBot run website, but it's a repository for 3D models. There's over 1 million already predefined models out there. So you could literally go in and type in, oh, I don't know, I'm hungry because it's almost lunch, fork, and there'll be 100 forks that come up, and you could just download and print them. You can customize them. You could scale them. You could size them however you want. Just direct free downloads. TurboSquid is another one. NASA 3D, they've got their own site, and they're pretty much converting everything over to 3D models. And then Sketchfab is doing, with the British Museum, a lot of models as well. And so the idea here is don't be afraid. Give it a chance. Go and dive in to see some of this stuff. And when you have your 3D printer, just start downloading and printing. It's as easy as that.
That's super. So I'm going to take a couple questions here. Thanks for giving us that
Awesome.
run through.
Sure.
So the first question has to do with, does anybody know of a virtual 3D printer where students can practice to find flaws before using live materials? So I think this, obviously speaks to that issue of 3D printing is not necessarily quick, and it's not necessarily inexpensive because you do have filament, and depending on whatever filament you're using, I'm sure there's all different costs associated. How do you, sort of in a virtual sense, help students kind of trial and error?
Yeah, absolutely. Most communities, and we're one of them, we're what's called a service bureau. So you can literally get onto our website and you can download a file, and then we can print that for you on one of our printers and send it off to you. What we're noticing oftentimes, and we're a solutions company, so we really don't necessarily always think that 3D printer is the right thing for all of our clients right away. Try it out. Send us a file. We can print it for you. We can get you an idea of the cost of that particular item. And then as you start getting more and more and more and more, it might make sense from a business perspective or from a financial perspective to just get your own printer. And so we work like that. But there are service bureaus in almost every community that you can turn to. You could probably just Google 3D Hubs is another one that's a virtual online resource that you could have where they'll find a printer that's local to your community. You can send them a file, and then they'll do it all over the web and send your printed object to you.
That's super. So the next question is kind of interesting because it's sort of framed in an interesting way. Does Stax 3D have problem-based learning ideas ready to go for K-2 students? So I think we might have to unpack that one a little bit, but
yeah, so what I was mentioning earlier on the slide with the educational bundle package, the 3D printers for classroom use, we do have an offer that includes, we say really 4 to 10-year-olds, but certainly fits in that category that you just described, where it really kind of unfolds a different way to learn about 3D design and then 3D printing. And so as part of that bundle package, we have a book that's catered to 4 through 10-year-olds that a lot of the local schools in our district are utilizing, and seems to be a great augmentation of what they're currently doing in the classroom.
That's great. So that is something that's downloadable from stax3d.com? Like if you go to the top of the screen or something, there's a download link? Or
if you click on the bundle package, it's part of the bundle package. The actual book itself, the resource, is not available without the bundle package, the printer bundle package. Now that we are working on some of those offers, there's really not a lot of resources at that early age. This is one of the first that we've seen, and that's one of the reasons we're really trying. You can't really do it without a printer, and so we're like, all right, we already have a printer. We could try to figure out how we can, get the whole package out, and that's something that we'd look for help from KnowAtom on as well, because you guys are the experts in how to package that up the best for your clients.
Sure. Well, thank you. Well, and along those lines, if folks are interested to know what problem-based learning looks like at that K2 level. Our kindergarten curriculum is not publicly released yet. It's actually being used by a bunch of folks, but it's not public yet. It's being made public for the September, or we say fall of 2017. But if you'd like to reach out and get a sample of that, you're welcome to. You just have to do it kind of manually. But for the first or second grade, if you want to see what problem-based learning looks like without a 3D printer specifically, but the reality is that, like we were talking about earlier, it's not really, and that's why I was mentioning this question is kind of something it's phrased very interestingly, because it says, ready to go, having problem-based learning ideas ready to go for K2 students. That's in essence what KnowAtom does, but the problem-based learning ideas themselves are not ready to go. The idea of problem-based learning is to stimulate children to develop their own ideas, to actually develop and use content. And so, that's... I
love the way you said that, by the way. That's fantastic.
But,
exactly.
like it's really it's the root of these new standards, and that's, something that you can see if you check out KnowAtom.com/curriculum. And so any component that's a part of that, physical materials that we are providing, or even if you can envision something that's not part of that, is something that could be 3D printed with software and with printers like you've been describing. So I wanted to point that out because I feel like there's sort of two parts. It's the technology, right? And it's the actual curriculum, but some people look at curriculum as sort of like, well, this trimester we have to talk about these vocabulary, words, and concepts. It's much more granular than that. So certainly, maybe there's, at this point in time, I guess people have to reach out to KnowAtom and Stacks a little bit separately, but this
absolutely, and as you are, we're open to any dialogue on this at any time. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call, and Francis, you and I can coordinate back and forth if we get separate questions that maybe pertain to our different purposes. But absolutely, we're open for any help that we can offer.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, thank you so much. I want to respect your time. I know we've gone a couple minutes over. And anybody who has questions that have not been able to be on the live session, or who have questions that they may want to take offline that were not able to be answered, how can they reach you at Stacks or somebody on your team to have that question answered?
If they go, well, first of all, we can get Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, but also on our website www.stacks3d.com. There's an info page on there. Feel free to just click on that and fill out the form and ask whatever questions you need. You could also always reach us by the phone, 602-595-3155. I know I didn't put that on here, but for the recording, feel free to give us a call anytime. And again, all that information is on our website as well.
Wonderful. And if anybody has questions about KnowAtom, you can reach out to us in a similar sort of way at KnowAtom.com. Take a look under About and just contact us. Or you can reach Karen Peake, K-P-E-A-K-E, at KnowAtom.com. Feel free to call her directly at 617-475-3475, extension 2001. And the Stacks folks, you all are in the Mountain Time Zone, right?
That's right. Actually, I was thinking about you earlier. I'm looking at the sunny blue skies, about 79 degrees.
Oh, that sounds great, because we're in the Eastern Time Zone and just in Boston, so it's a chilly 22, I think, today. But nonetheless, thank you, Jason, for joining us, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thanks for everybody that was online. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. And thank you all for joining us. If you'd like to find more resources like this or the recording, for anyone who's signed up live, you'll receive a link to a recording of this, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint, which you can download. For others who you may be interested in letting know about this webinar, they can go to KnowAtom.com/resources, and you can learn about more of these discussions with innovators and innovative technology by taking a look at KnowAtom's resources under Innovators, or follow our blog, KnowAtom.com/blog. Thank you all for your day, and appreciate your time. Bye-bye now.